In A Game of Thrones, Jon Snow saves Lord Commander Jeor Mormont from some Wights who have gotten through the wall and are attacking him inside Castle Black. This is a little bit weird, considering the wall is shown to have a magical barrier built within it that is able to keep the dead from crossing over it. It's kinda the entire point of the wall. At the time that it happens, we don't actually get to recognize just how weird this is, but later on in the books, we get more information about how the barrier is supposed to work, and we get explicit confirmation that the dead cannot cross it. So today I'm going to explain what I think is going on here because I think I have a solution to this that may have some very interesting implications for the future of these books. Let's start though by going over that information that I mentioned that tells us exactly how the magic of the wall works, and basically tells us that these dead should not have been able to cross. One of the first hints that we get of this is the fact that Jon Snow loses the ability to sense Ghost when he's on the opposite side of the wall from him. Basically, they have a warg mental psychic connection that is some sort of magic, and the wall seems to break that magical bond. But the most important confirmation we get of this is all really revolving around Cold Hands. Cold Hands takes Sam and Gilly back to the Black Gate and teaches them to cross through it, so that he can send them up to retrieve Bran and company so that they can come down and continue their journey north. When Jojen asks Sam why he couldn't just come through the Black Gate himself, Sam says that he couldn't. He says that the wall is more than just ice and stone and that there are old magical spells woven into it, and Cold Hands could not cross. We later find out that this is because Cold Hands is dead, so the dead just cannot cross this magical barrier. The following exchange takes place in Bran Won a Dance with Dragons. They realize that Cold Hands isn't breathing, and Bran remembers the tales that Old Nan told him when he was a babe. Beyond the wall the monsters live, the giants and the ghouls, the stalking shadows and the dead that walk, she would say, tucking him in between his scratchy woolen blanket. But they cannot pass, so long as the wall stands strong and the men of the Night's Watch are true. I also do want to just throw in here quickly, Old Nan pairs up the dead that walk with the stalking shadows when she's telling the story of all the monsters that live beyond the wall, so this may be yet another point towards the idea of the others as shadows. I've talked a lot about how they're always described as shadows, and I had forgotten about this line, so I didn't bring it up when I was covering that in the past. I really do think, though, that when you take account of what Old Nan is saying here, the stalking shadows referring to the others is pretty likely. But the next things that she says here are what's important for this theory. The dead that walk are unable to pass the wall, and apparently one of the conditions of this is so long as the men of the Night's Watch remain true. Because, I mean, it makes sense that if the wall wasn't standing, they would be able to cross because something has taken down the wall, but it's a little bit weird that they could potentially cross if the men of the Night's Watch don't remain true. What's that part all about? You could be tempted to say that it actually just refers to the fact that the Night's Watch are there to man the wall, they're standing there with their swords to kill and fight off any monsters that try to cross the barrier. But to me that doesn't really make sense because in the example of Cold Hands, he's not being physically fought off or killed by anyone as he's trying to cross the barrier. It seems like he is magically being stopped by something going on within the wall. I do think that's similar to Bloodraven's cave, which he also can't enter. The magical barrier is likely because it's a barrier between magical warded weirwood trees, but you can check out my video on Bloodraven's cave if you want more information on that. That's not what we're really talking about today. Today we want to get back to what Old Nan was talking about the men of the Night's Watch remaining true. What's going on with that? Well, I think what's going on here is that part is very directly tied into exactly how those Wights managed to get across the wall in the first place. What seems to be going on here is that the magical barrier of the wall functions a lot like the magical barrier that keeps a vampire from entering your home. A vampire is physically unable to enter your home unless it's invited in. And it would seem that potentially the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch is the one who has the ability to invite the dead or these monsters through the wall. When you go back and look at the first book and the exact circumstances around those bodies entering through the wall, it's very clear that they were invited by Jeor Mormont, the acting Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. So just to remind you, these are two bodies that were a part of Benjen Stark's ranging crew that has seemingly disappeared, and these two end up dead pretty near the wall. This is already suspicious on its own. The fact that these bodies that were of rangers who were seemingly far away from the wall would be found dead so close to the wall is noticed as being a bit weird, In addition to this, they notice that the eyes of these bodies are bright blue. Sam also points out how there's no blood where there should be plenty. All of these wounds that the bodies have taken, and yet there is no blood near the wounds, there's no blood in the snow, there's no blood on their clothes. Something very odd is going on here. Reading everything that happens with hindsight, it's easy to see that it appears these bodies have been whited already. They were probably whited and then they walked themselves close to the wall and then they are basically playing dead laying there in the snow, which is pretty darn freaky. All of the animals except for Ghost are terrified of these bodies and are afraid to get anywhere near them, which seems to me to imply that the animals can on some level sense what's going on where the people can't. Then comes the fateful moment. "Burn them," someone whispered. One of the rangers, Jon could not have said who. "Yes, burn them," a second voice urged. The old bear gave a stubborn shake of his head. "Not yet. I want Maester Aemon to have a look at them. We'll bring them back to the wall." Some commands are more easily given than obeyed. They wrapped the dead men in cloaks, but when Hake and Dywyn tried to tie one onto a horse, the animal went mad, screaming and rearing, lashing out with its hooves, even biting at Kedar when he ran to help. The Rangers had no better luck with the other Garrons. Not even the most placid wanted any part of these burdens. In the end, they were forced to hack off branches and fashion crude slings to carry the corpses back on foot. It was well past midday by the time they started back. So it would seem that the difference between these bodies and Cold Hands is the fact that these bodies were specifically commanded to be brought through the wall by Jeor Mormont, the Lord Commander. Basically, they were invited in and they were carried in by members of the Night's Watch. The reason that I speculated has to be the Lord Commander that's the one who invites the bodies in is because if it wasn't the case, then Cold Hands could have just sent Sam as a brother of the Night's Watch through the Black Gate and said, "Okay, now that you're on the other side, you have to invite me in." It would make some sense to me that if there is this actual magical contract going on where the Night's Watch are the ones who are magically sworn to uphold the wall, and they are the ones who have magical power over the barrier, that their Lord Commander would be the one who has the power to break that barrier. The idea that this magical barrier and that this magical contract seems to work exactly in this way, in my opinion, is pretty well backed up by the events that we see in the text from Cold Hands to these Wights who are waiting outside to be brought in by the command of Jeor Mormont. In addition to this, it also fits very well with Old Nan's warnings that the monsters are kept on the other side of the wall as long as the men of the Night's Watch remain true. Another story that's painted in an interesting light with this revelation, if it is indeed true, is the story of the Night's King, who was in fact a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Given what we know about the Night's King from his other type woman who he seems to have been in love with and glimpsed from atop the wall, to the fact that he's called the Night's King and seems to have some sort of long night, othery type shenanigans going on with his story, it's very interesting to think he may have been someone who had the power to invite these beings through the wall. This fact that he was the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch could have given him this magical power that was needed to be so dangerous, and that could in fact be why he was so dangerous in the legends and in the history of Westeros. No one else who was the Lord Commander may have ever tried anything like this. At least, so far, no one else has tried anything like this. But let's remember who was the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, at least until he was recently stabbed at the end of Dance with Dragons. Our boy Jon Snow may actually be the one who is now in possession of this magical ability to allow the others to pass through the wall. And there have been many theories about the idea of the others taking over Jon's body or somehow getting a hold of Jon falling onto the side of the others in some way or another. You can insert your favorite headcanon theory as to how this may happen here, but the point being, Jon Snow has a history of coming to understand that the people or the group on the opposite side of the wall is actually sort of just like us, and in the case of the wildlings, he's the Lord Commander who welcomed them through the wall. Fans of this series have speculated for a long time that Jon Snow's role may be in some way or another to make peace with the others, and if he is able to make peace with them, inviting them through the wall may be a part of that. There is also, of course, the possibility that Jon Snow goes full evil mode when he is killed, and then he actually just leads the others through the wall for more nefarious purposes and has to be stopped. Personally, I think it's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more George R.R. Martin, and a little bit more well set up that Jon Snow will be playing some sort of peacemaker role between the others and the humans, in the same way that he was between the wildlings and the Night's Watch. So I do think it is pretty well set up that Jon Snow will have the ability to invite the others through the wall in the same way he did with the wildlings, just based on everything we've seen that seems to be surrounding the magic of the wall and how the Night's Watch seems to be magically bound to manning the wall. That to me seems like it's pretty well set up based on everything we've just talked about, so I don't think it's too huge of a leap in logic. I would, however, like to take a leap further before we end this video. In addition to the magical contract that seems to bind the wall and its barrier, I think there's another magical contract that could be very important with the idea of inviting the others through the wall. And that is, of course, guest right. Because let's face it, the others are pretty much unstoppable at this point. From everything we've seen of the Army of the Dead, unless there is some sort of giant magical kill switch if you happen to kill one of the others in the same way we saw in the television show, they're going to need some sort of magical way to get out of this mess. And at least so far in the books, there has been no magical kill switch of any sort that has been foreshadowed or set up at all. But what has been set up very well is the idea of guest right and the laws of hospitality. These laws exist north and south of the wall, and Mance Rayder suggests that they are old as the first men and as sacred as the heart tree. I have talked very early on in my entire big series about the old ways, about how I think the others may actually respect guest right, given that they are, in some level or another, part of the old gods' magic themselves. One line that feels very relevant to the idea of Jon potentially giving the others guest right, and in fact seems to set it up pretty much exactly, is a line that I forgot to include in that original video, but was reminded of down in the comments. This comes from A Dance with Dragons, and it's after Sir Patrick of King's Mountain introduces himself to Jon. He says, "I do not know how you observe guest right on your mountain, sir. In the north we hold it sacred. One is a guest here." Sir Patrick smiled. "Tell me, Lord Commander, should the others turn up, do you plan to offer hospitality to them as well?" Now, I'm not entirely convinced, but I think the answer to that may in fact be yes. The others may be able to be invited through the wall by Jon Snow, and the only hope that humanity may have of controlling them or stopping them from wiping out everyone else would be to offer them hospitality and guest right. The idea of guest right seems like it's being set up to have some sort of magical importance and potentially have some sort of magical payoff in the final parts of the story, and I don't know, like I said, if I'm entirely convinced that this is it, but to me it is definitely worth speculation. So let me know what you think of all that down in the comments. Do you think that Jon Snow could potentially give the others guest right? And returning to the original question of the video, do you think that the Lord Commander has this magical power over the barrier of the wall, thus explaining how those Wights got through to attack Jeor Mormont, and explaining what Old Nan was talking about how the men of the Night's Watch need to remain true? Thank you all very much for watching. I look forward to seeing what you have to say down in the comments. Remember to hit subscribe if you haven't already, because we have plenty more interesting things to talk about, and I'll be back with something else very soon.